Hi everyone, Martin here, ICT Magic, with this week's EdTech livestream. We have a lot to get through this week, so here's the news. It's been widely reported that Snapchat has brought out a map function. Users simply pinch the home screen to see their map. It should be noted that the default settings for this is off, so users do need to activate this setting if they want to make use of it. Clearly there could be some e-safety concerns here, and schools could take the opportunity to discuss e-safety based on this in their own classrooms. Oh look, there I am. Come and say hello. Facebook has been teaching their bots how to lie. And as devotees of the cult classic Red Dwarf will tell you, this isn't so easy. But enough about my misspent youth. Researchers say that this makes them interact in a much more human-like way. In a research project which was designed to help bots learn how to negotiate in situations such as customer service and retail, the group said that this was quintessential to the negotiating process. And finally, in a research paper published in Nature recently, it's been suggested that fake news is being allowed to propagate in part because of our short attention spans. The research says that many of us are not even getting past the headline and forming ideas just from that, meaning articles don't need to be necessarily convincing, just simply have a convincing headline. Naturally, there are lots of other things at play here: unconscious bias, wanting to be a member of the group, and what was I saying? Just a reminder that if you're watching this live, you can post your questions in the chat area, and I'll try my best to answer those at the end of the show. If you're watching the repeat on YouTube, then add your questions to the comment section, and I'll try to pick them up in a future episode of the show. Or you can also put them to me directly on Twitter. I'm at ICT Magic. Next up, it's my interview with Sarah Bedwell.
Yep, so my name is Sarah Bedwell. I am the lead learner for using new technologies to enhance teaching and learning at my school, Reading's Business and Enterprise School in East Lancashire.
Okay, and I know you're also on Twitter. What's your Twitter handle so everybody can follow you?
I am Fly My Geek Flag.
Yes, and I have my own geek flag as well, but you fly your own, please. So, can I ask you some questions, please? First of all, how can we make technology bespoke for learners?
Well, it's so open, isn't it? It's, you know, having, let me just think about this for a second. I'm sorry. I don't think it's necessarily about the hardware and making that bespoke, but it's what you do with it at the other end that's important. So, for instance, having, we're not a one-to-one school. We don't have iPads for everybody, but we do encourage students to use their own devices. We've bought tablets in the past for our Year 7 our new intake for them to use at home, and deliberately chose Android tablets because they can personalise them that much more. But really it's about what we do in the classroom to personalise it using technology, as opposed to, you know, as a whole approach, we all use this, we all use that.
Mm-hmm. Okay, interesting. So you say you're a bring your own device school. For those people who are not in the know, can you explain what that is, and also maybe a little bit about how you rolled that out originally?
Well, we're not, I wouldn't necessarily call us a BYOD school, but we have, we do allow students to use mobile devices if they want to. We all know that they bring their mobile phones to school. So it's a case of harnessing that technology that's in their pockets, as opposed to just completely banning it with restrictions and safeguarding rules and all the rest that applies. But if some students do bring tablets, very rarely do we see an iPad in school. I think mostly they're kept at home, mostly because they can't get onto a Wi-Fi too well with them. But, you know, using a student using their phone to quickly search for something, as opposed to having to book a computer room, having to wait to get logged into machines, all that kind of thing. It just, you know, there's no breakdown in the learning process in that way.
Mm-hmm. And what about independent learning? We've already talked about their own devices, but how can teachers help pupils to develop their own independent learning skills with tech?
We use a variety of tools for that. So we do have a VLE, which actually is pretty poorly used, I have to say, in terms of the actual software that we purchase. But we're I don't think it's called Google Apps for Education School anymore. We're a G Suite school, I think it's called. Mm-hmm. So using Google Classroom is becoming more and more common across our school. We're not the most tech-savvy staff, I have to say. Up until September 2011, we didn't even have whole school email, which sounds unbelievable, but is completely true. So we've come along in leaps and bounds. Yeah, we've come in leaps and bounds since then, and gradually we are using more and more tech. So even just using email is quite useful. in terms of all the students have Gmail, the same as we do. We can email our classes, etc., as automatically set up groups. So, being able to set specific work for different students, using Google Classroom to push some more than others in different ways, depending on what they need. Sometimes it's a case of, I had a student this morning ask me a question about something sort of to do with our learning, but not really part of it. So I just said, well, go away, find the answer and come back and tell me next lesson. And she'll do that. And actually I did that with a student yesterday who emailed me the answer afterwards. So there's all different ways that we use it.
Okay, interesting. So we spoke about bespoke learning and bespoke solutions when it comes to tech. But what about top-down approaches? What about things which are imposed across the entire school, such as email and such as Google Apps for Education, or now G Suite? Can they be successful?
I think they can, but it very much depends on how it's rolled out and how it's managed. So I'm not an ICT computer science teacher. I started life as an economics teacher and then an English teacher, and now I'm a science teacher, which is always an interesting conversation to have. But I'm not the kind of person that people just automatically think, oh, she's a computer, we can't listen to this, she just talks about stuff we don't understand. I come at it from a very, very different perspective. So I've done a lot of one-to-one training, a lot of hand-holding through bits and pieces. Sometimes, and it's pretty rare, I get to talk to all staff at once because obviously there's so many demands on time for training. So I did some social media training this year about using Twitter for CPD, which was really successful. So gradually staff are starting to find their own feet. But what I do mostly is go around and talk to staff about, what do you want to do? What do you need to do? How can I help you? As opposed to them, I want to be able to do this.
And how have teachers taken to things like social media? Do you think the adoption of it and there's a willingness to try it at least?
We're very much a school of two halves in that respect. So we have some who were already using it. I don't use Facebook at all, apart from to run our school page. I prefer Twitter. Some staff were already using Facebook for CPD, and if people are already doing it, that's fine. That you should do what suits you most. But we actually have got quite a few each week. I've slowed that down considerably now, and it's sort of usually once a month these days. But people are finding their own professional reading, which is hugely important.
Oh, interesting. So whereabouts do they find that professional reading?
All over the shop. So oftentimes I just have a scroll through Twitter and see what's popping up. Sometimes I'll see something and save it for later. Using Pocket is my greatest tool in that respect, the app. But it can be anything. It can be something that I've seen in Schools Week. It can be something that I've seen in the press. It can be something, not restricting it now as such.
Okay, and you mentioned Pocket and you mentioned Twitter. Are there any other nuggets and interesting tools that you'd recommend to people to try?
Let me think. I love Planboard. It's an online teacher planner because, frankly, I hate carrying around piles of books just for my own planning. So I've used that with a few staff. A couple have asked me is there anything I can recommend, or they've seen me using it. And so I've put them onto that, which is fantastic. But stuck with this one, and it's really, really great. I use Google Drive all the time for bits and pieces. Google Forms, that seems to be our go-to at the moment. I showed a couple of people that, maybe trying doing this using a Google form might be useful because it'll collate everything and you don't have to spend hours doing analysis. You can just press the button and it does it. And now it seems like everything comes out via Google form. So I have to find something new for stuff. But I think they're probably between G Suite and Planboard and Twitter, the most used bits and pieces.
And you've mentioned Twitter a few times. How can we use Twitter to maybe meet up with people in real life? Because I know that you've got an event coming up, which I hope you'll mention a little bit. So how can we use these tools to maybe move from the virtual and digital world into the real world?
Well, yep, you're right. I do have Lead Learn Lancs coming up in September. There's, most of the sign. I did drop it and break the first L. 30th September at my school in East Lancashire. Tickets are just £10 and there's a huge lineup of people. It's the second year that it's run, and I have to say, in terms of moving from virtual to real life, last year it was probably one of the most amazing experiences of putting that together, and having people like yourself travel the country to come and speak at it for free as well, because it was a free event last year. But just, finding out about the kind of conferences that people are running and where they are. There's lots and lots around the country now. I started Lead Learn Lancs because I didn't see much happening in the Northwest, and I was a bit tired of travelling to London constantly. Northern Rocks in Leeds is fantastic. I'm going to TLL Leeds this Saturday and Exabytes next Friday in Bradford, mostly because of being on Twitter and just sort of chatting to people and saying, yeah, let's come and do this, let's meet up. And the Twitter education community, just certain aspects of it are absolutely amazing in terms of support. People really do reach out, spend their own time helping each other, sharing resources, and not for their own gain either, I have to say.
Mm-hmm. And I was at Lead Learn Lancs last year, and I have to say it was a fantastic event. So for anybody who wants to go along to a fantastic event in the Northwest, then I would highly recommend that particular one. So would you say that tech represents value for money?
I think there's two sides to this. We trialled iPads, very much against my wishes, but I was overruled by the head who loves Apple and by another member of staff. So we dipped our toes, luckily, and we bought 11 iPads in our first round and topped it up with a few more. But they just weren't as able to be personalised for what we wanted. We were very locked into different bits and pieces that just didn't work for us. And then just to really take the cake, most of them got stolen. So it was an expensive experiment, but it wasn't as expensive as trying to roll it out at once. I think people had made the mistake of thinking the iPad was going to be the magic silver bullet, the magic solution to education, and it just wasn't. And for some schools, it does work. I don't want to size obviously across the board. For us, it didn't. So what we've gone back to, which suits our staff a lot more, is what we talked about to begin with, about that personalised approach to tech, where this may work for you, it may not. We'll try something else if that doesn't work.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and do you have any top tips for those schools that are trying to roll out tech or using tech on a budget?
I think find out who's using what around you, first of all, and go and visit and see what works and talk to the technicians and the network managers. So, for example, a few years ago, we were moving away from our county council provision for internet. It was just expensive and it didn't go very well, and we couldn't update our own website, and there are all sorts of problems with that. So myself and the network manager went and visited 4 or 5 different schools using the different companies we were investigating, and spent a lot of time looking at how many devices are they running, what are they doing with it, so we could then look at what kind of speed we wanted. But the filtering systems and everything else, we spent a lot of time doing it and came up with the best solution for us, which turned out to be probably one of the best decisions I've made in my role, definitely. And the money that we saved on that obviously allows us to go and buy more tech. But I really would recommend go and see it in action. Don't just think, well, I know Apple, it's fantastic, let's go with that. Or I know this, so I'll go with that. Go and do the research and see how it works in classrooms.
Mm-hmm. Fantastic advice. Sarah Bedwell, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Next, I have not one but 2 reviews for you. The first is a book which I have plucked from my classroom, so this is something which I have not been asked to review. It's just something which I really do like for my own primary school classroom. It's a book by Mark Scott, and it's everything that a child needs to independently get coding with Scratch and Python, so 2 of the most popular languages used at primary school and beyond. So Scratch coding, if you're not aware of that, we'll be doing that a little bit later in the live stream, but it's basically when you move blocks around to build up code from simple building blocks. Python, I will show you what some of that looks like, and it looks a lot more advanced than simple blocks, and as you can see, it is actually based on real text, just like a real programming language. It is a real programming language. A lot of what's done on things like Raspberry Pi are done in Python, so that's a fantastic resource to get young children, especially primary school age children, to start coding independently. So this is we've got a couple of these books in the school, and they're checked out constantly out the library because kids love them. They're just fantastic. This next item is the Mikey Bot. It's something which I'm quite excited about seeing come to fruition. It's currently on Kickstarter, and if you want to get Mikey yourself, there are lots of rewards which you can choose, but to get it, the pledge you have to make is £50, which is a steal for what it is. So it is a robot which draws based on the programming which you do. So you can program it through Scratch or through the Blocky system, and it looks like a really fantastic way of bringing technology and art together, which is always a fantastic combination. So really excited about this one coming to fruition. I hope you'll check out the Kickstarter page. And as always, you can get the links for both of those resources from the live chat if you're watching live, or also on the YouTube notes, the show notes if you're not watching live, if you're watching the repeat. Next up, it's my ICT Magic resources. The first site is a simple app which allows you to compare fractions and decimals. Simply control your turtle and collect the decimals which meet the criteria. The next resource is one of my favourites. It's something which I use for behaviour management. I ask the children to keep the balls still during times when we need some quiet. Yes, for the first 20 minutes it will have the opposite effect with the children trying to make them bounce, but after that it becomes a really nice visual cue. This next resource is an Android app which teaches computational thinking through logical choices. The user needs to break down the tasks into tiny steps for the robot to follow. Here's a conservation website about the tree octopus, except it isn't. It's actually an e-safety site. Use it to highlight that not all the information on the internet is correct and reliable. Lastly this week, Google have brought out a fantastic suite of resources and games to assist teachers teaching e-safety. There are lots of documents and lesson plans, but of course the thing we're all interested in, the games, are also fantastic. Just to remind you that the UKEdTech online conference you can now get tickets for. It's coming up in October, and we've got an amazing lineup of over 40 speakers from around the world. It's going to be a fantastic event. I hope you can join us. Next up is my weekly scratch. Okay, today I'm going to show you some very basic navigation as if you're some sort of vehicle. So this would be quite a good use of code if you're trying to make some sort of racing car game where you're looking down from the top and going around some sort of track which you can draw. So as you can see, I've already drawn my very fine racing car here. Yes, it is just a rectangle which I drew on bitmaps. And I've already started putting some code in, so I have some basic navigation here. So I've got a down arrow command, so I've got a down trigger, which makes it go backwards. I've got a left trigger on the keyboard, so a left arrow key trigger, which turns it by 15 degrees to the left, and the same for the right key going right. Just to show you how I made those, if I go to events, and then I'm going to go to when something is pressed, then it's going to do the command which comes underneath. So for this one, I'm going to use the up arrow, and exactly what I've done for these ones here. I'm going to go to motion, I'm going to get move 10 steps, and just so it doesn't go flying off the page straight away, I'm going to reduce that down to 2. So I've got -2 for backwards and +2 for forwards. And as you can now see, if I go forward on my arrow keys, or go up on my arrow keys, it goes forwards. If I go down, it goes backwards. And that's going left, that's going right. Now, that's all very nice if you're driving a shopping car, but to actually get the feel of some sort of acceleration and car-like movement for our rectangle, then actually I think we can do a bit better than that. So, what we're going to try to do now is to try to use some sort of acceleration. And to do this, I'm going to create a variable. And variables are just a simple number which goes up, down, and can be reset to a particular number as and when you need to. So make a variable. I'm just going to call it speed, and I'm happy for it to be all sprites. If you're unsure, then usually all sprites is fine. If it's got an independent name, if it's got a unique name, then usually for all sprites is fine. Okay, and you'll see that I now have the figure of 0 in my corner there. So what I can do now is I can replace the variable into this number here. If I do that, it's still only going to move by 1, or by whatever that number is going to be. So I'm actually going to create an entire new bit of code for this. So I'm going to use, I'll use that one later on. I'm going to use my when clicked. So when I click the green flag, then this particular code is going to start. So I'm going to make this code go on forever until it stops. And I'm going to, again, have a motion, some movement going on here. And just so it doesn't all happen, because obviously this is going on forever, so it's going to keep repeating this forever and ever, just so it actually pauses briefly in between those steps, because otherwise it will just go flying off the page, you won't see anything. Then if I go to wait, and I'm going to put that down to a fifth of a second, so 0.2 seconds. So this is going to happen hopefully about 5 times a second. And if I click that now, you should see that it goes forwards very nicely and stop. Now, to control this a little, I'm going to use our variable. So I pulled this out earlier, and I'm going to use the A key to mean acceleration. And we'll need a deceleration in a little while, but just first things first, if I go to data and go to our speed, I can drag this number into where the 10 is currently. And then to change the number, I need to get the change code. So change speed by however many you want. So we're happy with the number 1 here at the moment. And then if I press A, you should notice that this number goes up by 1. Obviously we haven't actually started the code yet, so nothing's happening. We also need a corresponding deceleration. So I'm going to use the right key on my mouse, which brings up this little table and duplicate, just saves a bit of time. And then I'm going to use the D key for deceleration. And then I can change this one to a -1. And again, if I press the D key now, you should see that that number goes down until we get back down to 0. So now we should have everything we need to be able to accelerate and decelerate. So it's not just going to stop suddenly, it should hopefully speed up when we press the A key and then slow down when we press the D key. I'm just going to drag this back down here to give us a bit of space. So if I start the code all running and press that, then nothing's happening at the moment because the speed is 0. If I press A, then it's got a bit of movement, and I can use my arrow keys as well to do a bit of steering. So I'm still going left and right. And let's go a bit faster. So we're up to speed 3, and then I'm going to press the D, and it decelerates back down to 0. Now, if I've coded this properly, you should also be able to go into reverse using exactly the same method. So now we're going into minus numbers, and again, steering works if you want to try to do some parallel parking. And that is the basics of navigating as if you're a car. So obviously there are lots of different other types of navigation you can do. So you can use coordinates. You can also do things that bounce off the edges. But for the time being, this is the real basics of being able to design a really basic racing game. That's almost it for the live stream this week. You can still post questions to me on Twitter at ICT Magic or UKEdTech. If you have a question and you're watching through YouTube, you can put your questions into the comments section and I'll pick those up for a future week. Just to let you know that this episode of the live stream has been funded by our very kind patrons on Patreon. You can find out more about that by going to the link in the show notes, which is patreon.com/UKEdChat. And lastly, if you've got a piece of EdTech news or you have something for me to review, then please do get in touch. Thanks for watching.